There's a lot of language that harkens back to the ways in which Black and Indigenous people are spoken about in the real world. Like, hey, you don't have to do racist things with the orcs. I think lore's best use is to inspire players to do something that's wildly out of the box. I get to make cool noises when I play them. Like if I play them when I'm in person with somebody and I play them, I do like a little.
Welcome to Characters Without Stories, a TTRPG podcast about the roads not yet traveled. I'm Star. This episode, I'm joined by VJ Harris. VJ is a professional TTRPG designer and pro game master. They're most well known for their work with MCDM Productions' Arcadia magazine and An Elf and an Orc Had a Little Baby. They strive to make TTRPGs fun and inclusive for all those that wish to play and respect others. VJ, I'll give you a chance to plug your projects at the end, but right now, do you want to tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so like it was just said, I'm a professional TTRPG designer. I do that and pro gaming full time. When I'm not doing that, I'm playing a lot of video games. Um, Current hyperfixation is Minecraft and Outer Worlds. Loving the kind of sci-fi feel of things. Kind of want to like do some more Spelljammer-esque stuff because of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know why I've been asked enough times like, hey, what else would you like people to say about yourself? That I should just have like a little spiel written up like, oh hey, it's this that. I do also spend a like fair chunk of my time playing with my old man of a dog, Nick.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, pretty much my life is TTRPG design and running it for other people.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of projects. So, VJ, tell me, who are you bringing to the table today?
Yes, of course. So, as it was mentioned, I wrote an elf and an orc had a little baby, which allows you to mix and match parentage traits. So, like stuff like, oh, you can fly, or you can breathe underwater with like all of the available 5e races, plus some like traits for monsters. And because of that, I am bringing my lovely spores druid, mind flayer Varqoor.
So this character is built for D&D5e, but you're using the rules from your book, the book that you co-wrote called An Elf and an Orc Have a Little Baby.
Yes.
And, a question came up for me when I was looking at your submission is that Mind Flayer is not a available race in D&D. And so you're building a character based off of a monstrous race, a race that is generally considered an antagonist to the adventurers in D&D. How does that work, particularly using your supplement?
Yeah. So the mechanical side of how things work, we took all of the 5e races, a bunch of the actual 5e monsters and stuff, and distilled them down to okay, what traits do they have that they would like inherit versus like social things that they would get from an upbringing, split that up, and then allowed you to choose from that. As far as the like antagonistic part of things goes, that's kind of a core part of the character. Like, not enough people know this, but I am a huge fan of mind flayers. They are literally my favorite monster. I have a mind flayer like picture in a frame and storage. I've got like a little mind flayer little like plushy dice bag that holds like 10 dice for when I want to travel with my dice and not the big giant bag. So like I won't say I'm the like expert on mind flayers, but I know a lot about them. And there's a lot of like interesting things that you don't inherently learn from any of the like 5e stuff. Like For example, mind flayers don't actually have to eat the brains of people that are like currently using them, could eat intellect devours. But if your DM were to homebrew, it could say, oh, you can eat recently dead brains instead of like people that are actually alive, or like animal brains, but doesn't get as much sustenance. But that's more of like a homebrew lore part than like actually factually backed up by anything in like 5e or previous editions as far as it goes. But back to like the antagonism is on purpose. It kind of sits in the same place, like having a character like that, as maybe having a werewolf or vampire. Like you've been cursed with lycanthropy or vampirism, and you're fighting against like these new urges as you continue your travels with your companions to do whatever deeds you're planning on doing. D- just slightly different because when I like to think when you're like when you become a werewolf or a vampire, you're still at your core you. There's just something additional there. Whereas Zarkor used to be, I don't even know what like parentage Zarkor used to be, maybe a half orc before they were turned into a mind flayer, and like that pretty much just completely takes over, save for like some memories that are left. Like there's really no consciousness or trace of the person that was before. Again, save for like memories and some personality traits that might bubble to the surface. So it's just still kind of doing the same thing as vampires and werewolves, but with a personality that's completely alien to who you would have been before, save for a few bits and pieces.
Can you tell me how an elf and an orc had a little baby approaches parentage and upbringing and how that is different from how standard D&D approaches that?
Yeah, so let's take a half orc for example, right? Current 5e half orc gets relentless endurance, menacing, which allows you to gain a proficiency and intimidation skill. You learn a language. You get savage attacks, which means when you score a critical hit with the melee weapon, you can deal an extra damage die, and dark vision and that kind of thing. Pretty much what an elf and an orc does for the official 5e races is take all of these existing traits and sit down and ask, okay, what would you realistically inherit from like your parents' bloodlines or your great grandparents or your grandparents, that kind of thing? And what is something that you would culturally learn? So, in the case of the half orc, things that would be a parentage thing are dark vision, relentless endurance. Things that would be a upbringing are menacing and savage attacks, and like the languages you use, along with any like ability score improvements you get. So really, it still uses the framework of 5e stuff. Like there's a couple of occasions where we added an ability to make sure that it was balanced once we split things off from each other. But it's pretty much just taking all of the traits that are there and sitting down and saying, okay, this goes here and this goes here, and then after that it you're given like 16 or 18 points to like use to buy traits, and you can also get traits that are worth negative points. So like sensitivity is -6 points. So if you take that, you get 6 more points to like play around with. That way it helps balance out a lot of things. So people who are like, well, this is going to be like terrible min-maxing, which I don't really have a problem with min-maxing. I don't think it's that big of a deal in a lot of places, but allows for people to willingly take on detriments, even if they aren't doing it for the additional points. They're just like, oh, this would be really cool. Oh, I like, for example, the grung have like something where they have to be in the water every like 4 hours, where they start to dry out and potentially die. Like a character could choose to take that on if they wanted an interesting like gameplay sort of thing. But that's pretty much like the gist of how an elf and an orc handles race and upbringing while still using the 5e official race framework.
Right. So instead of using the word race in the supplement, you're using the words parentage and upbringing. Can you talk a little bit about what those mean?
So the way we treat race in 5e is supposed to harken back to how we like actually use the word in the real world, in my opinion. Different racial categories of people based on like skin tone and whatnot. And parentages is the replacement of what race should have been in 5e, because like I get where it was going, but as it were, race also encompassing things that like you have to learn culturally versus just like biological aspect of things, which is uh how it is often used in the real world, sans some like other like major issues. So parentage is like, okay, look, you were trying to say, oh, hey, you have these sets of attributes that are tied to your biology or whatnot in common. And so parentage does what the word race should have done in 5e, if that's what they were going for. And then upbringings handles the part of it where it's like, I'm not going to be born with this stuff. I'm going to have to be a part of XYZ culture if I'm going to say, hey, this is what I learned as I was growing up as a kid.
Right. I think that's a really interesting way to do it because you have a lot of stories. People are often putting it into their characters that they are a wood elf, but they were raised by orcs. And what does that mean? Because that's not the same as being an orc raised by orcs. So I think it improves the basic rules. Also, just divorcing it from the word race, which obviously that has weird and problematic associations. The way that we use race in real life is very different from the way that they use race in D&D, the word, I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
You were mentioning a half orc, and when I look particularly at orcs in D&D, I think there are a lot of problems there. One of the things that comes up is the way that they talk about the origins of half orc and how you can't actually play an orc, like it's actually not a playable race, that there has to be something mixed within it in order for it to become playable, which I think is kind of messed up.
Yeah, it I'm sorry, I could go on I could go on a tangent about orcs. Or like I love orcs. Like if mind flayers are my favorite monster, orcs, half orcs are my favorite 5e race, as it were. And I like I routinely play some type of an orc in a lot of the games that I play in so much and always typically code them as black because I'm like, I'm claiming orcs for black people. They're ours, which I mean, obviously other people of color. If you're like, hey, I'm also claiming them, like, no big deal. It's just how I like to interpret orcs for a variety of reasons. But yeah, there's a lot of language that harkens back to the ways in which Black and Indigenous people are spoken about in the real world, as far as like civilizing us through taking us away from our culture and planting us into white culture, or like just having this like fiery rage in our blood. We're always going to be savages kind of situation, or like
Right.
big brutes and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot of uncomfortable white supremacy esque language used on the half orcs, which is also part of the reason why an elf and an orc had a little baby was made to like address bioessentialism and to like give alternatives like, hey, you don't have to do racist things with the orcs.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. It's kind of just baked in from the origins, coming from Tolkien and some fantasy works that had really bad ideas to start with. Obviously, Tolkien's orcs are coded racially and then also depicted as monolithically evil. And that was brought into D&D, and I think the idea of any race being associated with evil in that way is a terrible idea. And it in the case of races that are racially coded, it's also racist.
Exactly.
The other thing that I think of when I think of things like half orcs and half elves, and that is that they're an assumed mix with humans. That we don't say half human, even though that is also true. And so I think the nice thing about the supplement is that it gives you the ability to be half orc, half elf, for example, and
Hmm.
that's not an assumed human mix.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not gonna talk a lot about like the mixed nature of things because I'm a monoracial black guy. It's not my experience to speak to, but I can just say there's a lot of assumptions about like who is mixed with what and like how that mixedness is titled. Like it's all like you said, like half orc, half elf. Again, you never see half human. Like it's like they're assumed to be the default, which is wild in a fantasy setting that has that like wild in a fantasy setting in general, but also wild for a player's handbook that had a bunch of the official kind of default races for the game be not humans. But yeah, I just have previously had questions like, why does it always feel like if I say I'm a half orc, people are going to assume I'm part this? And I really wanted people to feel Well, me and Adam, 'cause I didn't just work on this by myself. Don't ever want anybody to like be like, oh, it's just me. Just like, no, no, no. It's me and Adam's love child.
What's Adam's full name? Let's give Adam some credit.
Adam Hancock, an amazing D&D creator, brought me onto the project. Actually, asked me if I wanted to work on it because it started off as his like, oh, I want to do this, and then brought me on. And ever since, it's been like our thing that we periodically go back to. Like we had Volume 1, we had Volume 2, we're working on Volume 3, and always have each other's backs as far as credit goes when it comes to like who did what. Like if people are like, oh, it's just Vita's book, I'm like, yeah, but don't forget Adam, and then Adam does the same thing for me. But yeah, at least for me, I always had when I played half orcs, I always had a feeling of like everybody assuming that I was part human, and there's just like, I mean, yeah, sure, I'll default to that. It's not like it means anything mechanically. So then when we did Elf and Orc Had I was like, ah, okay. Obviously, I could have been saying, no, 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 I'm part like drow or something, and saying, yeah, I just have some kind of like, you can see like the elven features along with my like orcish features. But just being able to like break it down and be like, yeah, no, actually, I'm half orc, half drow elf, and yeah, I actually was like raised by my drow side of the family, so I learned a bunch of stuff, that kind of thing.
So going to Varqoor, and I think it's interesting you mentioned taking the monstrous and bringing that into something that's playable. One of the things that I thought of when you were talking about werewolves and vampires is that monsters, they often start from something human. A vampire starts as a human, a werewolf starts as a human, and then they gain these monstrous abilities and monstrous characteristics. Is that something that attracted you to inhabiting a monster?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think that is the case. Sometimes I have a hard time explaining why I have such a soft spot for legitimate monstrous races. Like I know they'll call like bugbears and orcs and stuff monstrous races. I'm just like those are just different like humanoids. They're not really monstrous. They're only monstrous because of, lore connotations versus like vampires, werewolves, mind flayers. Like those are actual monstrous. They are monsters. And I can't put a finger on why I have such kinship towards monstrous things, but what you were saying, like, yeah, that's definitely a part of it.
Do you have a better understanding maybe of why you're so attracted to mind flayers in particular?
Okay, one, I get to make cool noises when I play them. Like if I play them and when I'm in person with somebody and I play them, I do like a little and like my I put like my hand up to my mouth and wiggle my fingers around like I have tentacles. So there's a little bit of that, right? But then there's also like, I mean, one of the things I really love about mind flayers is their ability to change other entities into something else. Like in my opinion, mind flayers are the eugenicists of like of D&D monsters. Like there are other monsters that transform people, like whatever transforms people into deep spawn, or how the aboleth can turn people into an aboleth spawn, or whatever it's called. But mind flayers are the ones that take their tadpoles and stick them into other creatures to see, oh, what is this gonna do? Can it be something that I can use for help? And I'm just like, I feel like from a like storytelling and design perspective, there is so much that can be done with that. Like there are a lot of official like 5e things that have already been turned into mind flayers, like beholders, dragons. I think there are a couple of other things that like canonically. Oh, I think you can turn a purple worm into a mind flayer like creature. There's like the
Ooh.
Neolithid, which turns into one if a brine pool gets abandoned for one reason or another, and all of them eat each other until there's only one left. Like there's a lot of things that are official 5e stuff that are created from mind flayer tadpoles, and I'm just like the experimentation that mind flayers like to do on a mechanical sense means that there are a lot of things that I get to experiment with. And it's just like, yeah, the chalk it up to the mind flayers kind of thing. I don't even have to have a super in-depth, detailed lore explanation for how this evolved or magically transformed in this. Just like, oh, yeah, it was probably a mind flayer.
Yeah.
Allows me to do completely wild things. And then from a storytelling aspect of it all, so like officially, mind flayers typically only put their ceremorphosis into humans, elves, and orcs, I believe, because any other parentage, and you get like kind of weird things happening. Like, for example, it's either the gnome or the halfling that's like the little squidling. And I, one, I like the chance to explore what it looks like if you infect any of the like 5e official parentages with a Mind Flayer tadpole to see what you get. And two, there's this thing that I like to do in my settings, which I haven't done to a player yet. I have done to a NPC, the process of seromorphosis. They get the little larva, they put it in the eye, and it goes into your brain and it begins to turn you into a Mind Flayer. There's like a small percentage chance that it doesn't actually take effect, but that it also doesn't kill you or kill the like little tadpole. So at that point, you've got this like tadpole entity living inside of your head while you're still like also you. And it
Hmm.
opens up a lot of like interesting role play to be able to say, oh, yeah, I've got this like alien foreign thing in my head that kind of has some knowledge to it. Because I like to think that like mind flayers are a telepathic and psionic culture. I like to think that these seromorphosis, the little larvae that like hang out in the brine pool underneath the elder brain, are like telepathically given all of the information that, a newborn mind flayer would need to know about like the history and that kind of thing. And
Hmm.
so I like to think of it as like, oh, maybe you have like a supercomputer of knowledge in your head that maybe you can access to your detriment. Like if you want to try and say, I'm going to think really hard and try to get these memories out of here, it could have dangerous effects, but also allow you to potentially answer a question you probably wouldn't have been able to answer otherwise or without like something like a really high powered legend lore or something.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think as a player, I also really appreciate having something within a character that is hidden to the character and that gets a chance to come out in unexpected ways. I think that's always really fun.
Mhm, exactly.
I wonder how important it is to you what the lore of the parentage is. For example, dwarves are hardy and they work with stone and all of that information. How important that is to you when you're deciding on a character.
Pretty much in every instance, I'm one to say, don't let the lore of a race or something stop you from playing out an interesting like concept that you want to play. And I say that as a player and as a DM. Astral elves, for example. Let's say that I was just like, oh yeah, astral elves don't exist on the prime material plane at this point. I don't know if this is canon, but like the part of it that's canon to like my homebrew world is that obviously there is like other planets in the system that the material plane planet exists on, but a bunch of them are like sci-fi tech kind of thing, and the material plane is in its like fantasy magic era, and that's why there's a lot of high level restriction between the planets of the material plane and the rest of the solar system, because it's like, well, this part of the universe or whatever is used to dealing with science tech that's going to introduce more magic than might be there, completely throw off how things work, upheavals, nations, etc., etc. And the magic part, which has some techno arcane stuff because you have artificers and stuff, is not at that point where they're particularly equipped to deal with the more science tech of things. And so there's people like, hey, you can't traffic in this, you can't do this, like keeping the things separate for the most part. And but like let's say that I said there were no astral elves in the fantasy world part of this universe and they're all out in space and that none of the players are from space. If somebody was really like, I really want to play like a fish out of water kind of astral elf that's like down on the material plane, I'd be like, all right, okay, so here's your options. You could have been stuck in cryostasis or something, like your pod crash landed and you've been here for, I don't know, 1,000 years or something, asleep. And then you woke up and now you're part of this. I think lore plays important roles for players, for DMs. I think as long as you're not going too buck wild with it, I think lore's best use is to inspire players to do something that's wildly out of the box. So, like I said, my astral elf, where you're like, you crash landed in a spaceship and you've been in stasis for XYZ amount of years. Your body is reacclimating. You've forgotten your other abilities, that kind of thing. Lore is important for a couple of reasons, but I don't think it should ever hinder players building a character unless like you've gone into it saying, hey, and the other players agree to it, this is the exact type of game I'm running. So there are no humans. They're all gone because of some natural disaster, and you are all playing what D&D refers to as monstrous races, and you're going to uncover why all the humans are gone. Like, that is a very clear, specific campaign thing that's happening there. And if everybody agrees to it, you shouldn't try and be like, well, I want to be the one human. Like, not in that situation. Outside of like very specific campaign details and ideas, you should, check in and make sure your players want to do it in the first place. I don't think lore should be something that restricts a character creation idea.
Yeah, I think that's where an elf and an orc does something really right in that you get to keep the lore, but you divorce the lore from your character's alignment, for example, which is weird to me in the first place that alignment and race are linked, but also you can go against the established lore for your particular character.
Exactly, exactly.
You talk about being drawn to your ability to role play a mind flayer, and I love I love your example of the voice and the hand motions on all of that. What was the inspiration behind Varqoor in particular?
I was gonna say I rarely get to play, which is not actually. I get to be a player every Saturday, but I'm currently playing like a half orc, half tiefling character. So I'm starting a new game today, like an hour or so after we get off of this call. And so it's less that I never get to play, and more that I have never gotten an opportunity to be in a game where somebody would let me play a mind player. So I had never sat down. I thought about full mind flayers and mixed mind flayers because in most of my settings, I'm like, hey, listen, I know that mind flayers primarily reproduce via seromorphosis, but like, what if they also could have kids? What if they figured out how to do that? Like, if a mind flayer got out of from under the control of an elder brain, the influence, as it were, and went off topside, fell in love with I don't know, a dwarf, didn't want to and didn't have the ability to like put them through the mind flayer change. Like, let's just have some kids. So like there are mixed mind flayers running about as well, and so I've thought about like what that lore looks like and means in my setting, but it's like I haven't sat down and been like, okay, if somebody gave me the chance, who would I play? How would I play it? Why would I play them? And that like I didn't have any like super concrete influences, but that's why Varqoor came to be. The like I want to play this one day, and I don't think I get to use an elf and an orc had a little baby as much as I would like to. Like I for my pro games, I offer it as an option for people to build their characters out, and people do take me up on that oftentimes because it's a good system, lets you do a lot of different things with it. And it's fun to see how people use it, but I'm like, I think I'm going to start building out player characters with my system some more. It's fun and it could fine tune something. So I'm like, oh, this doesn't make sense. We need to fix that.
Would you say that when you're building a character, is your approach kind of like, I would really like to try this particular parentage, or I would really like to try this class, for example? What kind of is the first thing that you do when you're building a character?
Previously, before an elf and an orc had a little baby, it was definitely pick my class first. I have a list of all the classes that I haven't played, coupled with the subclasses I want to play with them. And so previously, it's like, oh, okay, I haven't played this and I want to play this. And then I go back and be like, okay, what am I feeling? Like it would be part way, what are good mechanics for this class, but also who am I feeling? Even let's say it was a spore druid. Even if I was like, oh, a hill dwarf is the perfect synergy for like the class and the abilities the hill dwarf got. If I was like, yeah, I'm not feeling a hill dwarf for this character though, I wouldn't do it. There was rare occasions where I would pick something that just didn't synergize, like gave me an intelligence boost versus the wisdom that I needed, but mostly I'd try to find something like gave me the boost that I wanted, but I still felt like, yeah, this is where this goes. Now that I have an elf and an orc had a little baby, and a lot of the times I'm allowed to use it when I'm building things, like I check in with the DMs, like, hey, I made this, here's how this works. Is it okay if I do this? Like that's what happened with the Saturday game that I play in on Total Party Kisses Twitch stream called Strange Hungers. It's a 5e horror game. I like asked my DM Alex, hey, can I use an elf and orc had a little baby? Here are the options for the orc and tiefling parentages. And all Alex said was, hey, can you not pick the wing version of the tiefling parent? I was like, yeah, sure. And then went on to build whatever the hell I wanted to build from that. Before it was kind of like, what kind of story do I want to tell, which is still a part of it, but now it's like, okay, what kind of traits do I want to grab that will shape what kind of story I can tell, right? So because we have a point systems and you can take traits from different parentages as long as you have points, you could technically, and like in the first book, the way we described it, it's like, hey, if you wanted to do a family tree, to explain why you're able to gain access to this, you can. So we had a whole thing where like there was one family that was half lean-ins with lion person, half tiefling, I think, and then that kid married to another family that I think was like half dwarf, half turtle, and then those two had kids, and then that kid got to choose traits from like both parents and then both sets of grandparents because it's down that line, and the upbringings also have a point system to it. So like we have suggestions like, hey, here's militaristic upbringing, that kind of thing, but they also have points. So if you're like, oh, actually my grandparents have these backgrounds and my parents have this, so I'm actually going to take things from that with the number of points I had. So am I telling a story where there are multiple traits coming in culmination to this one kid, multiple traits and upbringings, or is it just like my straight mind flare, which is what I did for Varqoor? And once that's been answered and I've like picked my upbringing, it's like, okay, so I know who I'm playing. If the multiple traits are playing a part of it, I already have some kind of idea of how that's going to work. And if it's not, it's like, okay, I know who I'm playing. Now, who is this character? Who are you? What class and subclass is going to really tell the story that I want to tell about you?
Who is Varqoor? You mentioned that they are a spore druid, but if you could tell me, kind of their age, their gender, if you've thought of their sexuality, kind of the basics.
Since I mentioned like Varqoor was created from Ceramorphosis on another individual, probably a half orc. Varqoor is about 23, 24, a youngin. God, I can't believe I'm calling 23 a young. Anyway,
That's a youngin' to me, honestly.
a young 20. Varqoor is a young 20. I went with Spore Druid because like there's a lot of like fungus and whatnot down in the Underdark. And I like the idea that the person that Varqoor was, which I have no idea what their name is, was a druid and was probably like captured on a raid to like a druid circle or something and brought back to be turned, was a druid, so maybe a low level druid that was just taken and was trying to like protect their home. And then Zarkor stayed in the Mind Flayer colony for a while around all of like the natural Underdark plantage and whatnot, the fungus and stuff, and then was sent off somewhere else and heard the other person like in their head and was like, I don't know what to do without this, and was far enough from the elder brain to like break free of that influence and like run off to try and figure out what was going on, and then while off in nature, like realized they had an affinity for said nature, but it was expressing itself in like more fungal matter than like your standard flora. And so realized that connection to nature, which I also think the other person, we'll say the orc's name is Thron's, I think Thron's was just like, yeah, you feel that? That's a love that I had for nature. And then that's when Varqoor is like, okay, I am a second level druid, spore druid, because of like how long I spent in the Underdark and having an affinity for the fungus and whatnot, and is just kind of out and about in the world for a long time trying to figure out who they are. And I think, I don't know if mind flayers really have like a concept of gender the way that other humanoids might, or that even we do, but like if I was gonna give Varqoor pronouns, it'd be they them. I think the like non-binary aspect of gender would suit a lot of mind flayers well if they even cared about the concept, because
Yeah.
like for mind flayers that are under the influence of a elder brain, they have access to the ceremorphosis, so they don't have to actually go out and have like sexual relations with other parentages to have kids, and probably don't feel the need to, since if they eat a brain they get a lot of the memories and like rushes of emotion and stuff, so they really could just be like out here eating people to experience like sexual gratification and orgasms and all that other stuff. So like I don't think mind flayers really in general in their like elder brain esque societies think about gender. It's like somebody asks them, be like they know what the concept is because they've eaten people, they've read people's minds, and be like, that's not really something that we do. Just here's my name, assuming they were like interacting with you on a professional level and not about to eat you. But yeah, Varqoor would just definitely be, yeah, I've heard about this particular one. We'll go with this for now, unless that changes or something else makes sense. But yeah, that's my kid.
I think it's interesting, that you're going with spore druid, because when I think of fungus, I think of they kind of have this infiltration ability, like they're often symbiotic with plants or with animals. We have so much fungus living within us. And there's this similar kind of thing with mind flayers is that there's in your case a synergy happening between the mind flayer and the original host, but also just infiltrating other bodies and becoming part of another organism. Was that part of your idea?
Damn, I wish I could say yes. Damn, that's actually a really good. I gotta make a note of that if I ever get to play Varqoor in like a longer term campaign to be like, hey, this was mentioned to me at one point. But no, it was really just I know I want to play a druid, and it was really like I want to play a druid. I want to play the subclass. How does it make sense for the character? How do I connect it back to it? Because if I want to play Varqoor, that is the main person that I want to play. And I was like, okay, I also want to play a spores druid, but how does that work with this character? And if I couldn't make it work, I would go down to another class and subclass to see if this works better with that. But because they're in the Underdark and there's a lot of fungus, not to mention like actual fungus people, the Myconid, a lot of things just kind of floating down there. I was like, okay, this makes sense about why they would have an affinity to spores when Throns didn't have a druid circle at this point when they were turned into Varqoor. So it was more like, how does this work where they are and with the like information that I have already?
I know what mind flayers look like in general, but can you tell me about Varkor's particular appearance?
Yeah, so I think I kind of like the idea that mind flayers typically, share pretty much identical appearances, save for occasional, like, some things from the host body translate over. So maybe, like, Varqoor might have some little tusks somewhere underneath his, like, tentacle mouth. But actually, what I actually think it is that Thrawn's had, like, a long cut along his left eye when he was out and about in nature once when he was younger and injured himself. And sure, druids can heal, but I also kind of imagine that this enclave would be like, hey, yeah, we can use magic to heal a lot of things, but like it's also okay for our bodies to do its natural course and heal for us. And so that's why like still has this long scar, and it's also Varqoor has it too, just a long scar down his right eye. You can still see out of it, like it didn't. Thrawn's wasn't blinded from it, but otherwise, I think at the start of this adventure, Varqoor, besides that scar, looks like pretty much every other mind flayer. I think something that would be fun and interesting to figure out, like, even though Varqoor is a spores druid, could still wild shape into a variety of things.
Mm-hmm.
What if any, like, injury that they get in their wild shaped form, they have the scars on their bodies as if they'd been cut unless somebody heals it. So the whole damage doesn't carry over still works. It's not like if I take 10 points of damage on like my bear form that I'm also getting 10 points of damage on like my mind flayer form, but it is still affecting me and causing me to have a number of different scarring on there. And part of me is like maybe it has something to do with the fact that Varqoor is in control. Like I don't think there's any point in the story where Thrawn's like takes over control, but Thrawn's is there talking.
Mm-hmm.
There's a split in the headspace, and like I want to be clear, I'm not. If I play this, it be very careful not to play into weird like schizophrenic tropes or anything. And like
Right.
I'm not trying to say that Varqoor is schizophrenic. Like Thrawn's does exist. Thrawn's like the host body's conscious is there in some way. And so maybe because there's not really synergy between the two, like here's Thrawn's who's you stole my life and my body. Say that's my scar. That's my scar. My scar is on your face when it was on my face. And there's not like a lot of synergy or a lot of companionship or camaraderie between the two at the start of the adventure, and maybe there never is. And so that is fucking with the druidic magic that in like a regular case wouldn't be carrying over scars onto druid's body when they're in animal form. I don't know how exactly that would work for an explanation. Like it would need something deeper, but like that's kind of what I imagine, and then that allows for like more and more Varqoor to stop looking like your standard mind flayers.
Is Varkor adventuring so they can kind of figure out what's going on with this other person inside them? Or is there another reason why they kind of set out to begin with?
I think what's happening with Thrawn is such a rare occurrence that while mind flayers know it can happen because Ceramorphosis, like I said, I think that the elder brain downloads all this information into the larvae that get put into people. But this might be the first time it's ever happened in this mind flayer hive. When it happens to Varqoor with Thrawn's out and about on a raid, spooks them in a way that they've never felt that emotion before. I think the fight or flight response humanoids have kicks in. I don't know if mind flayers have that or not, and just runs off. At that point, has run off in the middle of nowhere, can't contact the other mind flayers that they were with, and is just kind of stuck out there on their own, maybe to a point where they're kind of starving because they have to mind flayers have to eat, like I think they have to eat a brain like maybe once a day at least, and like if you go X amount of days it becomes a problem, and are just like completely disconnected from everything that has to do with being a mind flayer at that point, and like do stumble across, like, I don't know, somebody that was recently mauled by a bear, is like clearly going to die but is still like technically alive, barely bleeding out, and just like eat the brain. They eat the brain instead, where Thrawn's is like, fix him. Like Thrawn's in the back of the head, like, you can do this. Like, just literally reach out and instead of like, just eat them. And of course, Thrawn's is absolutely disgusted at this, and that just Thrawn's anger and whatnot just pushes Varqoor more away from the whole mind player thing, and then has some time to be like, okay, this is different. Like their mind isn't influenced by anything. The influence of the Elder Brain might actually be why Thrawn's couldn't break through initially, but further away, Thrawn's in their head yelling at them on and off. What were you doing? Blah 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 blah. Recounting flashes of Thrawn's memories, wanting to understand what emotions they're feeling and seeing. So they head off and like, I don't have to be the way that I was before.
If you were to get the chance to play Varqoor, do you think that in the role play you would actually role play Thrawn's at the table? And if you were to do that, would you use a different voice for them?
Oh, definitely. I kind of imagine Thrawn's is like kind of something deeper, like, Varqoor, listen to me. Just reach your hand out and just feel the emotion. Just feel what I'm feeling. Touch them and fix them. I think Varqoor communicates almost solely telepathically. I think that the way that, because of the like tentacles and like the weird shaped throat and mouth, the way that mind flayers speak might be like nails against a chalkboard for other races. And so did that once, had somebody's ears bleed because of it, and now just speaks telepathically. I do different voices. I'm actually not sure what Varqoor would sound like telepathically because it's definitely different than whatever they'd sound like if they were speaking. But yeah, definitely. Low register for Thrawn's and then something for Varqoor.
Varqoor, what's something you're naturally good at?
Well, before all this nonsense with Thrawn started, I was pretty good at capturing other creatures for experimentations. I was really good at tracking them down, studying them for what the larvae would do when we injected them with it. I have actually been able to witness a beholder be turned into a mind witness, which was an interesting process. And actually, before I left, actually gotten a hold of a Dragoloth, a fiend mixed with a drow that we were going to see what would happen if the Ceramorphosis took hold, but I left before any of that could happen.
VJ, thank you so much for sharing your character and coming on the podcast. How can people find you? What kind of projects do you want to share?
Well, first and foremost, since you mentioned I am a podcaster, you can find me on VJ Talks on Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, my website, vjhcreations.com. Yeah, those are the four places for the time being, branching out to other places as soon as I figure out how to get them there. I actually have an episode about mixed race identity in D&D. I did a roundtable with a bunch of people. I am also a professional freelance TTRPG designer. You can go to my website to the projects page of vjhcreations.com/ products to find all the stuff that I've been a part of and where you can buy it if it's available for purchase at this point. And then finally, I am also a pro GM over on startplaying.games, where I strive to make a fun, inclusive game for everybody that's there to respect each other, but especially minorities, because I know it can be a hard time finding a group that not only do you gel with, but are also going to treat you with the respect, humanity, and dignity that you deserve. So yeah, and if you're looking for that, it's startplaying.games/DM/DJ.
Yeah, I'll put links to all of this in the episode description so it'll be easy for people to find this.
Thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking about Varqoor and talking about an elf and orc had a little baby. I think it's a great approach and kind of solves a lot of problems that D&D has. And I am excited to try it out in a future game.
I'd love to hear what you think.
You can find me on TikTok at StarMamaC. That's StarMamaC. You can also listen on YouTube. Just search for Characters Without Stories. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, share with your friends, share with people who aren't even your friends, share with everyone. Every little bit helps. I'm currently accepting submissions, particularly for non D&D characters. So if you'd like to share your character, you can go to the submission form at characterswithoutstories.com. Thanks for listening, and may all of your characters find their stories.